So good morning and welcome back to the Dogs and Deadlifts podcast. So this morning or this evening, if you're in the States, we have Ashley Sculac from Canine Resistance Training. Welcome.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for having me. I know we've been talking about potentially getting together for a while, so it's pretty incredible to finally at least have this conversation. We've chatted a ton online, and I appreciate you, like I said, getting up super early, at least in your time, where it's a comfy 4:00 p.m. for me. So again, huge thanks to having me on here, and I look forward to having this conversation. I know that, like I mentioned to you, I've got a lot of questions here written down that people had wrote me, and then I think we have some that we just want to kind of talk through and just start the conversation out. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, for sure. No worries. And I think you and I, it's been probably, a good 12 months, maybe. I think you've even got some Dogs and Deadlifts merchandise over there. Yeah,
I do. Being pregnant now, I can't quite fit in it, but yeah, they were my favorite shirts. They're super comfortable. So if anybody's listening, deadlift shirt, you know who to go to.
That's it. Awesome.
Yeah.
So, look, let's, we've got the Dogs and Deadlifts podcast, has a variety of different listeners, so let's just take it back and can you give us, I suppose, an introduction to, I suppose, yourself, and then we'll talk about how, Canine Resistance Training came about, the business concepts and stuff like that. But let's fire away, first of all, if it's okay, a little bit of background yourself and, of course, your dogs.
Sure. So I'm going to try to make this, I guess, concise. You know how sometimes this gets dicey. You'll follow it. So I've been working with dogs, probably I'd say close to going on 5 or 6 years steady. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's not currently where I live. I know for many people who aren't local to the United States, just a different state, about 12 or 13 hours away. And I started doing a lot of behavior modification. I have 3 pit bulls now, but at the time I had 2. And they were a lot of behavior issues. One is super impulsive, you could go as far as saying she's a little dog reactive. And we'll get into her story and how CRT came about, because that's really the reason. And then the other one that I have still, who's actually sitting behind me somewhere, you may hear him at some point. But he was the guy I started like Mondio protection sport training with. That was really a goal of mine. I started working with a lot of trainers in my area, and then got kind of into really just working with behavior cases. I did that for about a year or so, dabbled in scent work and all this other stuff. I know that you had Dr. Erica Bowling on your podcast, and I've worked with her a little bit. In fact, she, came to Pennsylvania to work with us and do a seminar, so she's fantastic. And then I started working with, I'm not sure if you've had him on the podcast yet, and hopefully if you haven't, you may. But I had been working with Jay Jack of Next Level Dogs, and that's sort of where I got the introduction to weight pull, competitive weight pull as a sport. And before I dive into that, I'll tell you a little bit about Maya, which is kind of the reason that we got into that. But she was around 1 year old. Both of my dogs are rescues, rescue pitties. Right around 1, she started developing this really like I don't want to say 4-legged limbness, but her whole front, both right and left, she would just develop random lameness throughout the day. She was only a year old, and it would come and go. I had her tested for Lyme's, all this stuff. Went through an orthopedic specialist, come to find out that she has, they were saying it was severe at the time. Went through CT scans, joint taps, all this stuff. Back with osteoarthritis of her front legs. And I was super devastated, because at the time, being so new into dogs, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like, what am I supposed to do with this dog who is, literally had a bite history, put like 7 holes in a European imported Doberman that the Center now, they changed the name, but It's like, what do I do with this dog? They told me she can't run, she can't jump, she can't do any of the things. I couldn't play ball with her, nothing. So that's when I started really, really picking Jay's brain. And he introduced me to weight pull. And he said, this would be something low impact for her that will allow that sort of drive expression that you're seeing, on other dogs. And I had never heard of it. Like I didn't even lift myself. So I'm like, what are you talking about? And, you know, we started diving into the history of the breed and so that I understood where she was coming from, sort of in a behavior sense. And that is what changed the direction of my training. You know, a lot of trainers do a lot of, they do a lot of rehab and, you know, board and trains and all of that stuff. And the thing that really fascinates me, and it took me a couple of years to come full circle and agree to it myself, but it's really just training people and bringing to light what good this sort of training can do. And it's not even the competitive aspect. And I love to compete on a personal level, but it's just the day-to-day training that I find so enjoyable with the dogs. And I started doing that with her, and it, you know, her and I went to competitions, we competed in events, and she's, you know, took gold for the state of Pennsylvania on rails and wheels. She did awesome, exceeded my expectations. And then I started getting into the facet of like coaching, you know, and like, how do I make what I learn accessible to people? Because that was really my goal. Side note about me is that I'm not a full-time trainer. What I really enjoy education and teaching. Mm-hmm. And so that carries over when you see me working with like the weight pool dogs, is that I really love helping the handlers figure out their dog and help them, you know, develop a coaching style and develop all of that. But I teach at, I'm a nursing professor. So I teach in university or, you know, in an academic setting here for us in the US. So that's what I do on a full-time basis, but in the side there, you know, that's sort of how it all kind of blends together. Mm-hmm. And one of the passions that I found, because I'm in the healthcare world and in nursing, is that I actually enjoy the medical cases. Kind of, yeah, you know, they come to me and they're going, I'm recovering from a TPLO and I want to get my dog into this. What do I do? And those cases sort of invigorate me. They challenge me a little bit. Mm-hmm. I really like them. You know, I like watching their progression. I like, you know, the handlers figuring things out. So it's kind of a weird little niche, you know, but I kind of enjoy my corner. Yeah. Resistance training.
For sure. And, you know, I think, you know, over the last, I suppose, I would say 12 to 18 months, maybe a little bit more, you know, here in Australia in this particular, you know, we're seeing in the emergence of GRC as well, you know, we are a little bit limited here with, I suppose, within Australia in regards to actual weight pool, you know, cart events and things like that, you know, so that has here, especially, you know, lit the fire in a lot of people's bellies. And, you know, they're certainly looking for, you know, obviously some help and some guidance around, you know, how to compete. But also, as you mentioned, potentially, you know, other dog trainers coming on and looking for, you know, other ways to, we'll talk about biological fulfillment shortly, you know.
Yeah, we will.
You know, to sort of think outside the box a little bit from the traditional, and get some fantastic results.
Yes. And that was one of the things that was so incredibly fascinating to me. And when I learned about it, you know, like, again, mentoring under Jay for so many years, it's like, as soon as he explained that idea of biological fulfillment, because, you know, it's a tricky concept for people who have never heard of it. And most of the people, obviously, that are listening to this podcast, to some degree, I'm understanding, are involved in dogs, maybe not. Mm-hmm. And hopefully, if they haven't already, you know, inquire about that biological fulfillment. And because I think it's the missing part for a lot of people, you know, we as humans do that stuff. And it made perfect sense to me. I'm like, we do things that fulfill our souls in general. We don't just do activities to get tired all the time, like physically tired. We want things that actually fulfill our being. And as soon as I heard that idea, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is why, you know, Maya was innately so good at this. I mean, I'm telling you, I wanted to bang my head against the wall. What she wouldn't respond to electronic collars or e-stimulation. She wouldn't do songs. I mean, she blew up in the face of that and was like, okay, try me harder. I'm like, what do I do? Yeah. And so as soon as I put that puzzle piece in there, not only did her health improve, I mean, she's going on almost 9 now. And said by the age of 5, she would not be able to walk. And it was like, again, like I said, devastating, kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have this dog at 6 years old and I'm going to have to put her down. And here she is, you know, I could still, she's semi-retired, obviously, but I could take her out into my garage where I have the track set up and she can pull like she's like, it's awesome. It's like automatic.
Yeah, for
You know,
sure.
she's still, yeah, she's still running, she's still going. So that's sort of what I hope to bring to people. You know, whether or not, you know, there's a lot of people that have reached out via Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, you know, I want to get started and what do I do? And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think that's awesome. And I often inquire about their goals, about what it is at the end that you
Mm-hmm.
want to do.
Yeah.
A lot of them say they want to compete. GRC is one of those organizations that's great in a sense. It made sleds, you know, kind of the ready, available vehicle for the competition scene,
Mm-hmm.
as to where most other organizations have to have a specified cart.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that makes it very accessible to the people in Australia and the other areas of the world, not even just Australia.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad to hear, you know, that more people around the globe are, you know, kind of being touched by, because like I said, when I first started, even 5 years ago, it wasn't nearly to the popularity as it is now. Wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really
And and you know, for me, you know, it's so versatile, you know, so we'll talk about how to get started and things, certainly, but you know, as you mentioned, you know, a dog that potentially has, we'll just say general, I'll just be specific, has some issues. People have, you know, let's just say they've you know, they've tried a number of trainers and or pieces of equipment, prongs, e-collars, stuff like that, and as you mentioned, just beating their head against the wall and looking for that piece of the puzzle, not necessarily that, you know, I want to be champion of the world type stuff. Hey, I just want to be able to fucking walk my dog down the street and, you know,
and I think, and that has been, you know, and you can talk about this, but there's even things that as simple as that, just like, hey, I just want to take my dog and, you know, get this harness I ordered. And that's what another thing that I have to like derail and talk about, because there's been like a misconception. I think sometimes that people go, how expensive is this to start up? And I'm telling you, it's like the least inexpensive part of dog training. You know, you get like a custom harness, which depending on the size, of course, if you have a Great Dane, it might be a little bit larger, but you get, you know, most of us have over here in the US, we've got some sort of bully breed or a mix or something like that, that usually this is where this comes into play. And it's like $60 maybe for a harness, $60 US dollars. I don't know what that is for you guys.
Yeah, let's just say Australia, just over 100, you know, but still, you know.
And that, and then you go and you get some toe chains from your local hardware, and who cares if they get rusty or dirty, and that's the awesome part about it. It's like all you need is your leash and your dog and those two pieces of equipment to get started, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, I suppose, obviously, you know, the harness is obviously a major piece of equipment there. Can we, obviously, on your website, you've got some recommended, you know, harness makers. I've probably got, you know, I'm a fan of Jimmy Allen as well. So, you know, I ordered about eight from him, just, you know, just, you know, just to have here for obviously clients as well. But, you know,
I was going to say, what's great about Jimmy is that he's actually been in the game a very long time. You know, when in conversations that I've had with him in years past, and that's sort of how I found him, was recommended through other weight pool trainers in, you know, the United States. And he and I started having many conversations, you know, usually late at night, like dog trainers do, and our brains started spinning. And he would tell me about all of the history that he's encountered. And he was very supportive of sort of the new imagery that I'm trying to give that old school classic training, but bring it into more of like a modern, and that's where we'll talk about the program, but it's like with and rehab professionals and those in the dog healthcare profession world, veterinary world, you know, they need to see how good this stuff can be for those types of dogs, medically recovering from TPLOs, all of that stuff. And so he was very supportive. And I know that if anybody writes him, and I'm sorry, I don't have his email on me, but I do know it's on the CRT webpage. You probably have a link to it too. But even if you just reach out to him, he's more than happy to accommodate any of the needs, you know, to get those harnesses. And just, you know, he's not the only one, of course. And that's probably the second question is like, what other ones? The other lady that I have found to be very helpful is Connie Powell from Lakeview Harnesses. She's been very, very good with the people that I have been sending to her. Because if you're doing the resistance programming, you're starting from the foundational work, she adds a little bit of extra length to your harness. Most of the time, what I have been finding is that if you're asking for a weight pull harness, a lot of makers, especially if they've been in the game a long time, assume that you're competing, and that's not always accurate. You know, some people just want a harness to go out and do the things like we're talking about as far as, you know, rehab, you know, aggressive cases, just incorporating it in day-to-day life instead of competing.
Mm-hmm.
So Connie Powell from Lakeview Harnesses has been my close second favorite.
Yeah, and I suppose, like I said, I know that you've got a a top 5 or list there on your website, and I can link to that as well if anyone is looking for harnesses. I believe that Lucy here in Australia is doing some stuff as well. Personally, haven't got one of her harnesses at this stage, but I've seen in your group that there's some good stuff there as well. And obviously, being a little bit more remote from Australia, here in Australia, getting things a little bit quicker than waiting for 4 months from the States. I think that's, I obviously had to wait manufacturing time, postal
Shipping
time.
time,
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I know that you want to get started, straight away, but sometimes buying from the US, etc., just takes that, can add it 4 to, depending on how busy they are, because they are custom, 4 to 8 weeks extra, sometimes longer, to get your harness, so,
I actually met with Lucy a couple months ago before she was starting to make these. She said, I just need to clarify a couple things on harnesses. And so I've seen her work, I know what she's capable of. And I apologize, Lucy, if you're listening, because I don't know if I have a link to your personal page that people can order from, but I do know she has one.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
I can put that link there. No dramas at all.
Yeah, so she's somebody that, like you were saying, Dan, could definitely get you a harness faster.
Mm-hmm.
And if your dog enjoys it, maybe you want to compete down the road, you want a more, they do a lot of fancy tape jobs and the colorations and the decorations and that. So if that's something you're interested in, you can certainly place an order. My best advice is if you're thinking about ordering a harness for any type of resistance training or weight pull competitions, do it now, because like you said, the wait time is very extensive. And what I find, and I tell my students all the time, is that, the patience that you show while waiting for that harness will be very helpful, because when you're training, it's not an instant gratification type sport. You're not going to see, or you shouldn't see, those results right like that. So if you can wait and be patient, and I know it gets super hard, but it'll serve you a really good purpose when you're training with your dog. So
yeah, no, for sure. So obviously step 1, we're going to do a little bit of research. You say, look, this canine resistance training thing is of interest, for someone's totally new. They're going to, research a harness, obviously speak to the harness maker in regards to size, measurements and stuff. It arrives in the let's just say it arrives in the post, and what's, what do we do next in your, in your program?
Absolutely. So kind of different avenues that I think you can take. And I get a lot of these questions actually, like through PM, Messenger and emails, and they'll say, I'm interested in this stuff, but what do I do? Where do I start? And the first thing that I tell people is that it's kind of knowing yourself. I have many students or clients, whatever you prefer to call them. I like calling them students, but if you yourself like to have all the knowledge up front, and you like to be prepared and know what you're going to do while you're waiting for your harness, I think that that's excellent. So what you can do, I have a website. I don't know how many people have actually looked at it that are listening, but www.canineresistancetraining.com. And if you are so new that your dog has never done this stuff ever, which is totally fine, you want to start by laying a good foundation. And I think that goes without saying. I know Dan's going to agree with me, but in anything, whether you are Olympic lifting, powerlifting, weightlifting, running a marathon, you have to have a good, physical foundation in order to support weight, because that's another thing that people kind of get a little tripped up on. I get a lot of comments or emails that'll say, I don't want this to hurt my dog, or, my dog's never done this and I just want him to be strong for the rest of his life. And there's 2 different types of strongs, I think, as you and I both know. There's lots of heavyweight strong, and what you see sometimes with those dogs depicted in the Facebook images of them pulling 3,000 or 4,000 pounds. I don't know what that would be in kilos for you, but it's like, that's a snapshot of the training that they have put in the years that they have spent. It's not just your dog should be able to do this next week, and that's not what we should be throwing them into. So I tell people all the time that it's foundational work.
Mhm.
So in the CRT programming, and that's sort of where CRT programming is a little different. Like I get a lot of questions about that too. Like, isn't this just weight pull training? And 100% the picture looks exactly the same. Like you'll see people out there dragging chains, but sometimes they don't always have an answer for why they're doing what they're doing. There's no rhyme or rhythm for, okay, I'm going to go out today with my dog and I'm going to do this, but I don't know how much weight I should put on. Or maybe I'll just throw an extra 20 pounds on today. And you're like, why did you do that? What were you testing? What were you trying to achieve in that session? So if you're brand new and you get your harness, and once it's fitted properly, there's a whole different, you got to make sure it fits properly before you start strapping weight down and start moving. But you want to lay foundational work, and that comes in the form of the building blocks programming. Ideally, it is a 12-week program. There are many dogs who work with me that last, they take longer, whether it's weather, injury, their own personal, life kind of happens and they don't get to follow that sequence in exact order, but it's roughly about 12 weeks of doing that before they are ready to move into a little bit more challenging programming. From the building blocks program, you have then the digging deeper, which is more dynamic effort. So that's where we introduce a lot of inclines, declines, heavy weight, shorter distance. The third one that I have is that shooting for competition. In essence, this is the program that shows you how to do all the sled work and the cart work in prep for competition scene, if that is something you choose. I don't say that every single dog that does the CRT programming has to do that. But it is there. I've had a few students already go through the digging deeper program, and their dogs have blown through the first foundational and they're moving into the second one and they're doing awesome. So that's sort of how the sequence that I have laid it out. Going back to your question about what do they do first, like you said, you want to make sure you get a proper fitted harness. That is something that I don't joke about as far as because there's many of them. There's the skijoring, the bike joring, those are all different. They're different for the types of sports. Mm-hmm. So when you're asking these dogs to pull weight, that's everybody's concern is I don't want them to get hurt. Well, you have to make sure they have good, proper fitting equipment. Mm-hmm. And it kind of stinks sometimes if the harness maker doesn't get it quite right and you have to send it back. Like I know how that goes. I've had to do it 100 times. But again, it goes back to making sure that is properly fitted for the dog. Mm-hmm. So if anybody's listening and you have questions about what do I measure? How do I measure it? One of the first things that I say is wherever you send your measurements to, and every single maker will be individualized. They're going to ask for different things, but send a side profile picture of your dog and say, hey, this is Brutus. He's 60 pounds and he's a pit mix, because 60 pounds looks different on every single dog. And most of the time, these makers are really, really good about guessing, but sometimes they just think that every pit looks the same, right? Mm-hmm. So some are leggy and some of them are stocky and some of them. So, and I keep saying pit, but we've got dogs all kinds. I have a feral hound. I forgot the name of it for a second. Yep. She's, the only one I've ever worked with, and I have a question on a sight hound too. That's why I brought her up. But yeah.
And that's something else I was going to say, so with the CRT program, look, let's just say, and, most traditional harness makers are used to making harnesses for pit mixers, that 100%. Yeah. So when I say, hey, I want a harness for my fucking Frenchie, they're like, dude, are you serious? Yeah. And my Frenchie Romeo has his own harness. You've seen him,
I have. It's the cutest harness.
So they're like, oh, not all are like sort of open to that straight away, and we've got border collies, there's, as you mentioned, side hounds, obviously lost my Sunday, and I've got a new GSP, so these, I suppose, what we see as normal breeds, these harness makers potentially see them as unconventional, yes. And as you mentioned, size, shape is a little bit outside the box for them. So
yes, and I think that's another thing too that I think we've touched upon it a little bit, but I want to make sure it's clear for anybody who is listening. If this training is not weight pull competitive specific, and I think that's something that it gets underutilized. If you're doing protection work, if you're doing sprint type work, such as, or for you, I guess, canicross would be a little bit more long distance. But it's like any dog that's athletic or anything, you know, hiking, even if you're doing just general hiking with your dog, this stuff is great to incorporate because it gives them that physical and mental confidence that's needed. And again, you don't have to go all the way to competition. And most of the time when my students start, they stop at like the building blocks, that foundation. They said, my dog loves this so much, I don't need to go to 50% body weight. I don't need to do that because they enjoy this right here. And I love doing it with them. And for me, that's awesome. That's what I saw with Maya. That's my end goal. Like, you as a handler have to write down your own goals and go, okay, what is it that I'm trying to get out of this with my dog?
Sure.
And so another thing, that before you get started, once you get your harness, make those goals for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, we won't go over it too much, but, this, I suppose we both stressed to do the fucking foundations right,
Yes. Yes.
and there was a conversation just recently about people wanting to rush things and, like, spend the time, have patience,
I know what conversation you're referring to, because it was a PRT group and it hurt my heart. Like, I'm like, man, we've got, the person we're referring to, she's fantastic. Like, the work that she's done with her dog and the advocacy that she has shown, even if she's not currently practicing because her dog has some medical conditions and sort of on the decline in general, and I fully support that. It's like, you got to know when to stop too.
Mm-hmm.
And she has said that many people, because the programming is too long or the work is too much. And for me, I mean, I wouldn't change this program for anything. I go back over it constantly. I'm like, should I do something different? Would I change it? And it's like going back to it still. It's like, that's the work that you need to put in. Like, you have to put that work in. If you're not willing to do that for your dog, you're going to burn out. The dog is just going to burn out. If you throw him on a heavy cart the second that you can, in a year's time, you will not even have tapped into the potential that dog has, because he's going to turn around and just decide, this is too heavy, too fast, I don't like it. And then you run the risk of injury. And both of those for me are, I mean, that goes against everything and the reason why I started.
100%. And you can put it over to human fitness training as well. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I just had a conversation. Like, I did CrossFit for a number of years, and but I was constantly sick and constantly injured. The high intensity sessions, both physically but also neurological for me, wrecked me. So constantly sick, missing sessions. Did I achieve the results I wanted to? No, I didn't. So
Right.
I had a good look at my training program, and I went way outside the box, and that's, led me on my philosophy that I train and how I train today, but yeah, it was crazy. So, yeah, let the dogs, both physically and also, mentally adapt and take it, and move forward at their pace. Yeah.
Yes. And I think too, like, not saying anything, because I don't even know what program you're referring to in CrossFit. And I did the same thing for powerlifting. Like, I was working with a very well-known powerlifter, and she's all over Instagram, and she's like a world record holder. But when it came down to it, her program didn't work for me physically. Like, I was having a hard time recovering. She was doing 5 days a week, squatting, high intensity at every session in the beginning of that. And it's like, PRT program for a lot of people, maybe the time constraints or how long it will take you isn't going to be doable for you. Totally understand.
Yep.
But you're also, again, you have to consider, not only are we talking, because people, again, they write to me all the time and say, I want to build muscle. But muscle is one component of a dog who is strong. You have to have mental confidence to be able to do what they do, right? You can't pull for 500 pounds, or even if you're looking at a sled, you can't pull 100% body weight down a 16-foot chute if you don't have the mental confidence or fortitude to do that. And you have to have ligament strength, tendon strength, bone density, all of that stuff to support that weight. And you do that by creating a foundation. And so I think that's where, referring to that conversation that you and I both saw happen, that's the part that hurt the most. Cause I'm like, you can't even explain it sometimes, that it's like, it's not just about getting onto heavy weight really fast. You've got to help build that dog up. And so I think that one thing that I think is so important about this programming is that it really does help to create that that foundational work.
Yeah, awesome. So, we won't harp on about the foundations much anymore, but
I know.
but
Yeah.
look, it is so important. Let's, if it's cool, let's jump into, I suppose the people that have been doing CR, been doing a bit of drag work, and they've got
Yeah.
a number of questions for you. Do you want to jump into, some of the questions, and we can, we can go over those?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I've got 3 different ones, and they're kind of all touching upon different things. So I want to start with talking about, somebody had a question about recognizing heat intolerance. And I think recognizing heat intolerance in your own dog is a little different than, I'm trying to find the right word for this, but recognizing when your dog doesn't enjoy working in the heat, right? I think those are 2 different things. Heat intolerance as a condition where they become pale gummed, they're thirsty, they're a little, I don't even want to say incoherent, but recognizing those signs as a heat intolerance, or you could Google that in a dog and on dogs and find that out very quickly. Identifying as a handler, my dog does not like to pull in the heat, and I think that is okay. I have many handlers who say that my dog will not go out in the cold. My own personal dog, Maya, she won't do it. She won't pull in the cold weather. But then we have a girl who's up in Canada, I think, somewhere up in Canada. She puts little booties on her dog, puts a nice tight fitting like jacket, and that dog will pull all day. He loves being out in the snow as opposed to the heat. And I think recognizing that in your own dog, is key. It makes you a better handler. It makes you more aware. It can help you determine your sessions and how they're going to go for that day, right? Like how much weight you put on them, and how far you go. But that was one question that she had, was just, how do I recognize that? And is it okay? 100% is okay, right? Like if you know that about your dog, you just adjust your sessions. Or if it's super hot out, or, for you guys in Australia, is it summer or winter?
Yeah, summer at the moment.
Okay, so for you guys, like getting up super early in the morning will be the best time, or even in the evening might be better, when it's more prone to being a more tolerable heat for the dogs, because again, they're working in that heat. And the same thing over here. It's at least in the northern part of the United States, it's winter, so it's could be anywhere from 10 degrees. I don't even know what that is Fahrenheit or Celsius for you guys, but super cold, super fucking cold. And so, for us, it's like a lot of us for CRT kind of goes on standby. We don't do a ton unless you're lucky and you have one of those dogs that loves to be out in the cold.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'm, and here in Australia, obviously I'm in Queensland, so we don't get snow. Summer is hot, but winter temperatures are non-snow. We don't get snow whatsoever. Right. So it's always checking. The temperature, obviously humidity plays a factor in that as well, so obviously with apps, etc. on the phone, for me, I'm always checking. I drove, 2 weeks ago, I drove 2 hours to run my dog for 15 minutes, because the temperatures were right there. They weren't where I live. They weren't right. So, we drove, a few of us, we drove 2 hours to hit that temperatures. We ran the dogs in front of the bike drawing. And it was maximum 15 minutes by time, that's including our warm up as well, so, we've got
people in Arizona, and again, over there where you're at, you may not be familiar, it's a state out west, and it's super dry, super hot. And we have a couple of people out there who were doing the programming, and they would get up at like 3 a.m, 3 a.m. just to get their session in for the day, because the risk of heat stroke or anything. They wanted to make sure that they were doing the best thing in the most conducive time frame and temperature for the dog to get that work done. So that doesn't sound crazy to me at all.
Yeah, and I think within the group, even just I know that I see Dallas, with her Roddy, jumping, she's always doing stuff at nighttime with the headlamp on, just to get it right, So
and I think that's what you got to do. It's what it takes. So that was that question. Anything else that you can think of maybe we're missing?
No, look, for me, I'm always just checking temperatures, humidity, when it's going to be right, and planning my programming around that.
Yes, and I like the way you said that. Like, you don't just skip your programming, you plan around it to make sure that you get it done that day. And I think that's you know, kind of what I'm going for is adjust. You're going to have to adjust, you know, depending on what's going on. So, and like I said, just to summarize that question for her, for the listener, I know it's Jen Wolf from the United States here, but she was asking that specific question. It's 100% okay that your dog doesn't like to do this stuff year round. Each one's individual, and I think that makes you a better handler and a coach if you can recognize that.
Yeah. And I know that you've made, well, I think we may mention it before, but in winter, potentially you jump on the carpet mill. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. That's another piece of, and it's different than the slat mill, you know, because the carpet mill, it's about, nobody's ever actually measured it, but I'd like to say it's close to like 9 to 10 pounds of resistance. So it's not that the dog hops on it and they can it just starts skating and gliding. They actually have to put a little bit of effort into getting that belt moving. And so that's a really great option or alternative. They're actually much cheaper than the slat mills. I'm sure you've looked at the price, but they're what, $300-400? I don't know what that would be over there for you guys, or even makers for you. But they're a good, you know, comparison. If you can't get out in the wintertime, but your dog might enjoy something like that, take a crack at it, because it's a great way to keep them conditioned throughout the winter when you can't go outside in the frigid cold temperatures.
Sweet as. What else we got there?
All right. So the other question that somebody has is, how do I make this work fun? And I like this one I swear I could talk for like an hour, but I won't. So you cut me off. Because at some point, and this is what everybody has to kind of wrap their head around, right? At some point when you go to the gym, right? I'm going to pick on you, Dan, because you were doing CrossFit. Right? It's fun for like the first week. Everybody's like, yeah, let's go, you know, pumped up, music's blaring, you get into this workout, it's fun. And then second or third week, you're like, holy shit, this is a lot. Like, my body's tired, I'm physically tired. And so the first thing that I have to say is that you as a handler should not be putting, so especially if your dog is brand new, like, keep that in mind. If you are just getting started, this should all be fun. The weight should not be so heavy that the dog is going, holy shit, I hate this activity with this woman or this man. I don't want to do this anymore. So keep that in mind. And that is why I think, again, at least in the first part of my programming, I don't put emphasis on obedience. Like, for me, it's not heel and we're going to do this. That comes at a time and place, but it's not right away. I just want the dog to be out in front of you, sniffing, walking, learning what that feels like, what the sound is like. Let them go. If you're noticing that, and I'll advocate for this no matter what, even if you wanted to do my program, you're like, you know what, I just don't think my dog's into it, then stop. Like, if you find that yourself is wanting your dog more than your dog is wanting this, then don't do it. Find another activity, because it all goes back to biological fulfillment. You have to find what the dog is fulfilled with, not what you as the handler want the dog to do. So I think that that's a huge thing to say. And as you know, part of making that fun, again, goes back to the weight. Don't make it so heavy that right out of the gate that the dog's like, this is the most awful experience. And you have to spend time recovering. You know, I know we got a lot of dog owners who want their dogs to be sort of athletes and do all these things every day. But sometimes it's nice just to have a day off. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes it's nice to just have downtime mentally, physically, let them recover and recuperate. And so I think you have to be strategic for when you place those days in, especially knowing what your dogs do. If you have an agility dog and you're trying to do CRT, probably not a good idea to have them do a really heavy session and then the next day you go to agility for 3 hours. They're going to be exhausted. You know, so I think you have to be smart about what other activities you're doing and pick days that make it available to you and the dog, that the dog can recover. What do you have to say?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because I spoke to someone on Zoom the other day, and she's got a German Shepherd, and she wants, she's looking to do, a drag work program, but she is doing a Monday night obedience, Tuesday night agility, Wednesday morning they get up and do tracking, and there's like the whole Monday to Sunday is chock-a-block full,
Yes. Yeah.
I'm like, wow, like, hey, high five, kudos for for taking your dogs all over the city, doing all this activity. But, number one, where does the priority sit for this type of activity?
Yes.
And number two, you've got too much on, you know?
Yeah.
You know?
And going back to one of the things that Jay, when he mentored me, one of the things that always stuck out in my brain that he had said to me, and might help somebody else who is trying to juggle all of these things that they're doing, these activities.
Mhm.
But he always used to tell me that it's not that you're overtraining, it's that you're under recovery.
Mhm.
And I think that is a huge, you and I know it from our sports and human athletics.
Mhm.
But when you look at dogs, just like you said, you can't be spinning all of these different plates. You can't be juggling agility and nose work and and then try to add more things in, because one of those things is going to falter. You won't be able to do it well. And unfortunately, it comes often at the expense of the dog.
Mm. For sure, and as you said,
Yeah.
recovery is just as important. For me personally as well. Heart rate variability, sleeps.
Yeah.
I track. I
I
track
was
this
gonna
shit for
say, let's
myself.
talk about recovery, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not just sleep, it's like nutrition and hydration and sleep and just having that general downtime. But I think all of those pieces make recovery, and you have to be mindful of that when you're asking dogs to be doing heavy loads or workloads, whether it's just weight workload or a bunch of different activity. So
Yeah.
yep.
And that's
That's my little. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's another piece of the puzzle people don't think about. You and I,
Nope.
we know about deload weeks, but also,
Yes.
the frequency, frequency, load, intensity, all these contributing factors, make part of the program, and that's why the program is successful as well, because we think about this shit, and
Yes.
and like I said, nutrition. All of a sudden the dog's he's not, he hasn't been eating correctly, or, he's not hydrated.
Yeah.
Therefore his effort, I work on a, perceived exertion or effort rate,
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
on a 2 when he, because he's tired and he's hungry, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that's another, you're right. I think that's another facet that people have to consider,
mhm,
when they're looking at the dog in front of them. It's like, oh, my dog's not having fun today. Is it just a day? Is it a
mhm,
week? Then you have to examine what has been happening. Did we do more activities? Did we have a death in the family that you can't mentally recover from? I just had this conversation with a student, and she said, I don't feel like my dog is enjoying it. And I had to look at her and I had to go, what's been happening in your life? And she started telling me all these things. And I said, is it that you're not enjoying it right now?
yeah,
And she was like, holy cow, I didn't even think of that.
yeah,
Like what I am feeling is portraying onto my dog.
mm,
And so that's another thing, to keep in mind when you're trying to, because fun, you can't measure fun. I mean, how would you really do that? And at some point, if your dog is good enough, this will cross the barrier from butterflies and rainbows and frolicking in the grass to, oh my God, I really have to work now, and it comes to that point, but you only do that when the dog is ready and you have a good idea of, okay, if I work him super hard on Saturday night, then he needs all day Sunday to recover. And I got to make sure his nutrition is good and he's getting what he needs. I'm a raw feeder.
mhm,
So for me, that's a lot of supplementations, and I got to look at the protein sources that these dogs are getting, what vitamins am I trying to replace and all of that. So for me, that was really important and a huge part of her success and longevity in the sport. So, recovery is just as important, I think, to keeping it fun.
yeah, for sure. And I'm all about the whole holistic approach. We need to look at the
Yep.
whole big picture, and
Yes.
obviously as well, we need to have a look at our goals, but let's put all these puzzles together. And
Yep.
sometimes there's just, every fucking dog's different, and
Every
we,
day. Yeah.
we need to
Yeah.
apply different techniques, or different, philosophies to one dog, compared to the other. So.
Yep.
Don't get bogged down, and you really need to, from the handler's point of view, is have a look at everything. Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of the side work that they can do, like
Mm,
they're just sitting there and they're not doing a session. It's like, all right, let's sit down and look at this. Let's take a look and see.
mhm,
Um, and so I hope that answers your question. That was another one for Jen,
mhm,
her club members for GRC. So I know that they had been asking about that.
mhm,
The last one that I had here, we kind of touched upon it, Dan, where we were talking about non-traditional breeds. I guess there had been a question to a woman. I don't know this woman personally, but she has a sight hound, a greyhound, and she had been inquiring about getting into this type of training. But a lot of the sight hound folk I don't know the subgroup that kind of goes with that. I don't know what sports they're doing, but they were kind of deterring her and saying that these will use the wrong muscles. And so, I have a couple thoughts on that. And so hear me out. I hope that it comes across correctly. But as we mentioned already, we're seeing a huge influx of non-traditional breeds, which I absolutely love, because no matter who you are, I don't think you can really argue that every single dog has the right to have a healthy, fulfilled life, regardless. Now, again, that fulfillment is going to be different. Obviously, we know greyhounds, and I talked about one of our clients, the Pharaoh Hound. She uses the CRT programming for lure coursing, which I think is awesome. She doesn't compete. I don't care. But she said that she's found an exponential, the increase in power that dog has, because obviously the muscle that she's been building has been exponential. She's placed first in a bunch of competitions. So she's been really doing the work, and I think that's awesome. As to the wrong muscles, it depends. I don't know enough about lure coursing. I've not participated in it on my own, but I don't believe, I could be wrong, I don't believe they're a weight-based sport of some type. I don't think they have to step on a scale like you do in weight pull competitions, and you have to weigh in a class, in a category. But, to say that you're going to target the wrong muscles, when you do the CRT programming, you and I both know that it works not only rear end, but it also works, the front end there. So they do get a core stability as well. That's not to say competitive, right? Like, we're talking about still just building in those very beginning phases where a lot of this physical change happens. But if you have these dogs as greyhounds step on a scale, sure, they might gain 5 pounds, but it's not going to be 5 pounds of fat and unwanted muscle. It's going to be, bone density increase, muscle mass is going to increase. So to say that it's the wrong muscles, I don't know if that's the right word that they're trying to convey to her. Have you had anybody in your experience do this to you?
So I haven't had that question. A few of my friends that do, bike, sled dog type sports during the winter do participate in, lure coursing in the summer, particularly over night times. I suppose we obviously, just have to check, obviously, terminology that, that can get lost in all dog training. But, for me, CRT program is going to build strength, power, speed, no worries whatsoever, so for me, just about doing the correct weights, correct distances, getting it on the money. If lure coursing is the primary sport, will you be fast? Will your dog potentially be faster, more agile, stronger? Fuck yes. But it's about
and that's what you're right. I guess, for her and her question, and that would be something that if she's listening to this and she does hear this question, I would not only going back to, like, what are your own goals for your dogs? Like, screw everybody else. What do you want for your dog, right? And if you want to be the best at lure coursing, number one, top this, beating everybody, then maybe you got to figure that out, but ask these guys, what are you inquiring about the wrong muscles? Like, that's sort of I'm not in it. Maybe it lends to the idea, or at least they're thinking about, it's just going to make these dogs huge and massive. And that's not the case at all. I've never seen that. I've seen dogs lean out and develop more definition in their muscles, but it's not like they're making them these huge barbaric muscular beasts, So I think that would be a good question for her to clarify with these people who are saying that these dogs shouldn't be doing it. But it's also sort of taboo. Like, I've never seen a greyhound do it yet.
Exactly. But also, let's compare a 1 to 200 meter Olympic sprinter, track sprinter, the physique and the body, the body shape, to a marathon runner, at the Olympics. They're totally different. Yeah. So, for sure. So that's
totally different. And the one thing that I have to say, Dan, too, now that you brought that up, is that either one of those athletes, whether you're a marathon runner or a sprinter in the Olympic Games, both of those athletes cross-train. Both of those athletes do not just do that designated sport 24/7. They're going to be swimming. They're going to be they're in the weight room, they're going to be lifting, they're going to be doing other things to help with their primary sport. So I think that's another thing that people have to keep in mind, because again, when we say weight pool, that's sort of misleading to many people, because that's speaking to competition. You know, and I think that if you're looking at just resistance training in general, and there's other things that classify as resistance training as well, it's not just the CRT programming. But if you're looking at that, it is different than competition prep and competition weights and all of that. So, you know, again, we are talking about the Pharaoh Hound, but that's what she was using this programming for. She wants to cross train to better her primary sport. I fully support that, 100%.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I don't think I have anything else to add on that as well. You know, add in, your balance, your proprioception work, your CRT program. Thanks for coming. And I think that followed, a structured program, there would be, a leaner, more powerful, quicker dog doing lure coursing.
Yep, I agree. So that's actually all the questions that I had written down. Anything that you feel like we're missing? Big gaping holes?
Not particularly. I think I'd seen those particular questions there as well. So I don't have any. I suppose a couple of things we wanted to just do before I sort of wrap things up a little bit.
Sure.
Let's talk about the book. Yeah, we'll talk about.
This that was a big project for me, as many of you guys know, just from listening to earlier in this podcast. Education is sort of my thing. That's what makes me tick. And I think that there's so much lacking on resistance training in general. Sure, you've got Facebook groups and forums, but it's the same as, having books and having internet resources and websites. It's more just hearsay, and this is how so-and-so used to do it, and blah, 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 blah. So I made it a goal to try and create a book, because some people don't like to do audio. Some people just like to read. And I wanted it to be another component of education that they can add. And so I took almost 1.5 to 2 years of writing that book. And I finally published it. It's only available on Kindle right now. But it's the Canine Resistance Training. When you look at it and you search for it, it should be little Malinois, little Belgian Malinois on a little harness. But in that book, it's not the layout of the programming. It just goes through a lot of, again, looking at general physical preparedness, looking at duration, dynamic, max effort, looking at the history, the public perception, all of that stuff. So it's a lot of things that I talk about like in passing with like people like you, but I wanted to put it all in a book. So check that out. Again, it's available on Amazon Kindle. And it's also linked in my website as well. There's a little tab that you can click and it'll take you directly to it and you can order it. The people that have been reading it have loved it. If you read it, leave a review on it. That would be super helpful. Tell me what you think. People are already asking for a second one. I'm like, you gotta give me. I just put that one out. It takes a lot of work to self-publish. I'll give anybody credit for it. Holy cow.
Yeah.
But
no, awesome. What I was going to say is, look, I have, and I think I've got a copy of the book. Obviously I've done, your online program as well. So, if people out there are thinking about, they want to, obviously want to know a little bit more, get involved, potentially the book is a great first start, your website, and then sort of, they can reach out to you via socials, can they?
They can. And if they're in your neck of the woods, they can certainly reach out to you. I trust you know what you're doing, and you can guide them in the right direction. Always be there for backup. And we have a private Facebook group that I try to keep to people that are really truly interested or are doing the programming. People post their videos and questions and comments, and I'm usually readily available. During the heat of the semester, sometimes it gets tricky.
Yeah, but in the next how many weeks to go we got?
Oh, like 3
weeks to go. So you might be a little bit occupied in about 3 weeks.
That's what I hear.
Look, my twins are about 7 months old now, and certainly been fun, but we all know it's a lot of hard work.
It's a lot of work, yeah,
for sure. But look, we'll sort of wrap it up there for today. There's a heap of different things that we could obviously go into and talk for hours about, but today I just wanted to get you on, have a have a bit of a chat about, especially what CRT is, answer some questions, and a real super informal chat. So look, hopefully, once, you have Bub and everything's going well, potentially, we can catch up again and,
Yeah.
maybe dive into some deeper stuff as well. But really today was about, what it is, foundations, a little bit about yourself. Did you want to have, add anything else before we sort of wrap it up?
I don't think so. Like I said, if you'll probably link all this stuff to, check out the website, the book. If you have questions, you can certainly write me. That's not a problem. Get a hold of me through email, or you can PM me through Messenger as well. And I look forward to, hopefully catching back up with you, and hopefully answering any more questions that might have come about, as a result of this or whatever. So I just appreciate your time. Thank you for having me. This has been great.
No, look, thank you very much as well. So,
Yeah.
so I'll sign off. So if you guys, if you like what you've